Welcome, everybody, to Architects and Engineers for 911Truth. This is our webinar series, and my name is Richard Gage, AIA. I'm an architect of 28 years, and I'm the founder of Architects and Engineers for 911Truth. We are in week 2 of our webinar today, and I'm quite delighted to share with you some in-depth information about World Trade Center Building 7, the third tower that collapsed on 9/11. And I encourage you to look at last week's presentation, week 1. It's archived below on our website. AE911Truth.org is the website. We have lots of interesting information there for you as well. Additional evidence, additional videos. We have a store with all kinds of resources for you. If you've already looked at a lot of this evidence and want to do something about it, we'll talk about that later. We also have the ability to email you the latest evidence, the latest efforts we're making toward a real investigation, and all our progress and projects, and ways you can help. So if you click on the sign up, the email newsletter, you can be connected with us. You can also join AE911Truth. We'll talk about that in a moment. But first, I want to introduce you to our operations coordinator, Mr. Andy Steele.
Hey, Richard. I want to thank the audience for tuning in again this week. And I just want to remind everybody, as I do each week, that the resolution defaults to a low resolution here on these YouTube live broadcasts. So if you want to see these pictures in higher resolution, you just click on the gearbox underneath the video, select 720 HD resolution. And I would recommend that because today's presentation is going to be using a lot of graphics and you are going to want to see the details on them. So that's it.
And there's a lot of, thanks, Andy. There's a whole lot of reasons we're looking at 9/11. Yes, we're architects and engineers. That's our focus. And those who are not architects and engineers are supporting the architects and engineers and getting out the information to other architects and engineers, the media, the government representatives, so that we can get full awareness, particularly, as we mentioned this week, as we focus on World Trade Center Building 7. We'll do a quick review of Building 7, and then we'll look at the official reports that have come out, the computer simulations and analysis of these fires, which are said to have brought this building down. And we'll show you the evidence that we have that contradicts that conclusion of NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And we'll be looking at some of our 80 structural engineers now calling for, demanding a new investigation. I am certainly one of them. 10 years ago, I was shocked to learn from David Ray Griffin on the radio in Berkeley, who was being interviewed by Bonnie Faulkner on the KPFA radio program Guns and Butter. I was on my way home from a construction observation and literally just shocked. I had to pull my car over and find out if what I was hearing was true, because for the first time I had heard that there was another story that we had not heard as professionals from the mainstream media, from our American Institute of Architects and Engineers, or the American Society of Civil Engineers for structural engineers. And this evidence just shocked me. I had to find out if it was true. I did a lot of research. In a couple of months, I went to my architecture firm, who was thinking that I was, kind of lost it as I was talking about evidence of controlled demolition for all 3 of these skyscrapers on 9/11. And so I bought them pizza. I made them come in and watch this 45-minute presentation at lunch. And every one of them agreed with me, with their jaws dropped, metaphorically, that these are indeed, this is indeed evidence of explosive demolition. So I knew I was on my way to something. We had our first 15 architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. Now we have over 2,500. And people ask me, well, what is your background? Well, I've worked on these $3 and $10 million gymnasiums for this high school, and along with the $125 million construction administration for the whole high school in the Bay Area. More recently, though, I worked on this 6-block retail project near Las Vegas. And it has, along with the 2 mid-rise office structures, over 1,200 tons of fireproof steel framing. And so, like me, there's many architects and engineers who have similar types of experience now, as I mentioned, more than 2,500. And so these are demanding a new investigation of the destruction of all 3 skyscrapers for very good reason. I'm going to share that evidence with you today. They've risked their reputations. They put their credibility on the line. Why? Well, let's find out why. A lot of this evidence you'll see on our website, AE911Truth.org, if you're not on our website now. By the way, today's broadcast, as all our broadcasts, will be archived on the website, and you can share that link with your colleagues and friends and pass that around so others can take advantage of the information that you're receiving today, because we're looking at science here. We don't have conspiracy theories to offer you. This is indeed the use of the scientific method, which we've had for over 100 years in our modern society. And it's designed to winnow error from truth, fact from fiction. And the way it works, as we've learned pretty much in the 7th or 8th grade, most of us, we have a question. What brought down the towers, Twin Towers or Building 7? And we do some background research. What's brought down other towers? We make some observations. We construct a hypothesis. This is our best guess as to what happened. And we do some testing with experiments. We make some predictions. Well, if that were true, that hypothesis, what else would be true? What would have to be true? Well, we analyze the results after we look at all the hypotheses and test them, not just the ones we think might be right or the ones we favor because we might have a bias. We look at all of them. We don't rule out anything up front. This is an objective process. That's the key element of the scientific method is objectivity. Well, if that hypothesis is corroborated by the evidence, we of course report the results in an open, transparent manner. And we'll be looking at the performance of NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, relative to their transparency. And just as an upfront note, regarding Building 7 and their hypothesis of destruction by normal office fires, they did a computer analysis, and it is a black box. We don't have access to it. They will not release the input data. They say, quote, it might jeopardize public safety. Well, how could it jeopardize public safety? Especially given that architects and engineers who are tasked with ensuring the public safety need to have this information that NIST spent 3 years in the case of Building 7, 7 years developing. So we have some real problems with the transparency of NIST, as we'll talk about more. And if the hypothesis is not corroborated, what do? We go back and we construct a hypothesis that does stand a better chance against the evidence, the background research, the predictions, etc. So with that in mind, what we're going to do today is apply the scientific method. We gather data. Now, last week, we gathered a lot of data on what has destroyed other high-rises. We found that controlled demolition is certainly one of the ways, and we found that fire has never destroyed a high-rise. not in 100 longer lasting and hotter fires and larger fires in these buildings. Not one of them has come down. Fire is an organic process, though. It burns out an area in about 20 minutes in an office. Looking for fresh new fuel sources, it moves on. And so when a building, say a wood frame building, as I mentioned, not a high rise, but say a wood frame building, if there's a collapse, it'll be an asymmetrical collapse. It'll fall over. It'll fall in stages. It won't collapse straight down through the path of greatest resistance, the columns in the building. But it'll follow an asymmetrical collapse. But we do have some interesting tests that have been done in fireproofed steel framed and non-fireproofed steel frame buildings. This one that Jonathan Barnett, one of the actual FEMA investigators, lets us know about. Take a look.
The way in which steel-framed buildings behave in fires depends on their construction. In this test, done by British Steel in 1995, a large amount of typical office furniture was burned to see what would happen to the heavy steel beams that supported the ceiling.
When steel is bare, when it heats up, it gets weaker. It's not that it melts in a fire. In fact, normal fires are not hot enough to melt steel. Even if you were, for example, to use an unusual fuel like kerosene, you cannot achieve temperatures hot enough to melt steel. But what happens is it starts to lose its strength. And as it loses its strength, it starts to sag. It becomes softer and sags and can no longer support the load.
This was the largest test of its kind ever conducted. It showed how unprotected steel can be distorted even by a normal office fire. But as is typical in steel buildings, the structural beams only slowly and progressively warped and sagged. There was no chance of a sudden collapse.
In over 20 years, I have not seen, until recently, a protected steel structure that has collapsed in a fire.
This is extremely important background information. Of course, he's referring until recently to the 3 skyscrapers that allegedly were destroyed by fire. In the case of Building 7, quote, normal office fires. So this is directly contradicted by the most scientific testing that's ever been done. So it deserves to be questioned. Most people don't even know about World Trade Center Building 7. Did you know about it? This is the 3rd worst structural failure in modern history. And yet, most architects and engineers that I speak to, I go and I talk to thousands of them every year because we go to the annual American Institute of Architects conventions and we show them Building 7, and most of them have never seen this building collapse before. It's the highest building in most of our states. It's half the height of the Twin Towers, so it's kind of dwarfed next to the tallest buildings in the world at one time. But this is a very, very significant, huge structure. Each floor is the size of a football field. Now, this building was not hit by a plane. It's about it's about a football field in length away from the North Tower. And when the North Tower and the South Tower went down that morning, and we'll come to the North Tower and South Tower in weeks 3 and 4 coming up here. So definitely stay with us and learn more about that. But this building did fine after those towers came down. It had some damage from some of the beams that hit it, but NIST says that this is not a significant factor in the building's collapse. What happened to this building? Well, it went down about 5:20 in the afternoon, about 7 hours after. And there were a few small fires in the building. We'll look at them. But what we're going to do is follow the features of controlled demolition and see if Building 7 has any of those. And we went through these features in detail last week, so be sure to look at last week's webinar archive. Do we have a sudden onset of destruction at the base of the structure? Well, let's listen to Dan Rather and tune in as we see what may be our first view for some of us of this building's collapse.
And what you're seeing are high shots. Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself. Describe that. Now we go to videotape the collapse of this building. It's amazing. Amazing, incredible, pick your word. For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
Wow. Deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down. That's very helpful information, Dan. Dan's using his intuition to describe what he's seeing, and we should all do this because what we were told is that fires brought this down. And we were told that 7 years later. I mean, this is a report that came out 7 years later. So one of the reasons most architects and engineers know nothing about it. The other reason is that this, with very few exceptions, this collapse of this building was not played for us on mainstream media. Dan never spoke again about his views about this building. Something happened to it. The reporting of this building. Does it come straight down symmetrically into its own footprint? Second feature of a controlled demolition. Well, let's take a look from West Street. Pretty straight down, pretty symmetrical. Have fires ever done this? No. Look at the penthouse and screen wall. It drops symmetrically suddenly a half a second prior to the overall building, which directly contradicts the NIST theory, as we'll look at it later in a few minutes. That says that there was lateral instability from the right side of this to the left, or from the northeast to the other side of the building. But this shows that all the core columns must have in fact been removed at once in order for that entire main penthouse and screen wall area to come down. Well, I'm not quite convinced yet. Let's put a known controlled demolition on the right and building 7 on the left and see if there's any similarity. Should not NIST have looked seriously at the hypothesis of controlled demolition? Should it not have been the first? Since every high-rise that has come down due to controlled demolition, since no high-rise has ever come down due to fire, and yet that's the first and only hypothesis they seriously looked at, dismissing out of hand the hypothesis of explosive controlled demolitions, not testing for explosives at the site even. Yeah, there's a problem here. They go straight for these fires as their hypothesis. And these are the worst fires that we have photographic or video evidence of in these buildings. They're few, they're small, and they're scattered. And they occur on the 11th and 12th floor and the 13th floor. The location of the Securities and Exchange Commission, the worst fires. In fact, NIST focuses their whole collapse theory around those fires heating up steel beams around column 79, which then collapses, which then that instability travels vertically through the building because the column support pulls out from underneath the structure above, and then that travels laterally across the building. And this is that west penthouse and screen wall that are seen collapsing a half a second prior, indicating that all those columns must have been taken out at once. That's not the result of a natural collapse or fires like these. Burning at 350 on the 12th and 13th floor, where NIST focuses their attention on these fires expanding steel beams thermally, those fires are actually out over an hour before the building collapses. On the right, we see NIST theory, their fire simulation. These fires are moving at 3 o'clock back here, the worst fires. And at 4 o'clock, they're saying, and up until and through 5 o'clock, they're burning in the same place, even though there's not enough fuel to continue them. And that's how they developed their theory of collapse by thermal expansion. As that fire is burning, those beams are expanding. But the videos show something completely different. The videos show those fires out on the 12th floor prior to the collapse of this building over an hour. More likely, our simulation shows that those fires moved through this area and was gone, according to the visual evidence in the photographs, well past the column 79 area, meaning that those beams could not have been thermally expanding during the time of the collapse. So that invalidates their theory right there, which says that these beams, 50 feet long, expanded, pushing this girder off of its seat on this column, causing this floor to fall on this floor, et cetera, for 9 floors, causing the instability vertically through this building, and this around column 79, and then that instability travels laterally through the building. All of that occurs, by the way, in about 10 seconds in their theory, such that we have the gutting of the interior of this building a few seconds prior to the overall collapse, which you've just seen on video. Were that to happen, we would have had massive deformation on the exterior perimeter structure, which would have caused massive window breakage and granite panels breaking and deformation. So we would have seen all of that, and we see very, very little of that, if any. There's a few windows that are breaking, but nothing like we would have seen if anything like NIST's theory happened. NIST theory relies on a number of assumptions and fraud that I want to highlight. One, these beams are fireproofed with cementitious coating. They couldn't even have gotten to the heat, the temperature level required to expand them. The steel couldn't, because the insulation provided by the cementitious fire coating. Number two, in their computer model, they actually apply all of the heat to the beam in 1.5 seconds, forcing it to expand. Whereas, as you saw in the video earlier, these beams would have sagged rather than expanded if they were allowed to heat naturally, if they would have sagged at all, because again, they're insulated. Also, there are shear studs tying this beam to the concrete slab up above. They would have acted monolithically, and but NIST says those shear studs were torn out by differential expansion between the concrete and the steel. The problems there is, as I mentioned, the steel's heated up in 1.5 seconds, and the concrete, I don't even think was heated at all, forcing those shear studs to break. But let's say all that could have happened and these beams were expanding. Well, this is more resistance here on this girder than at the other end at the perimeter of the structure. So they would have expanded at least equally in each direction, not one direction. There wasn't an infinite level of stiffness at the perimeter structure forcing these beams to expand only in this direction. But let's say that's the case. And this girder is being pushed. Well, what does NIST do? They conveniently say that there's no shear studs on the girder, and which tie the girder to the slab again. Well, every structural engineer we've spoken to says you wouldn't design a structure with shear studs on the beams, but not on the girder to which the beams are connected, where all of that lateral force is developed from the beam to the girder. So that is a major omission and fraud. In fact, the drawings that we have show that there were in fact studs at the girder. But let's say there weren't, and that this girder was able to be pushed off of its seat on this column. There's not enough, even with the distance that NIST has developed in their calculation of thermal expansion, this girder never would have fallen off this seat. So what do? They conveniently omit these stiffeners. That is a little plate between the two flanges of this girder. And they say, well, it didn't have to be pushed all the way off, only enough to pass the web so that the flange folded once it almost got off of the seat. And they were allowed, they could do that in their minds because they omitted these stiffeners, which of course would have kept this flange from folding at all. So omitting the stiffeners, which are actually shown on the shop drawings, is another fraudulent omission on the part of NIST, allowing them to propose that this girder then fell off, and which couldn't have happened. But let's say that did happen. Indeed, if that would have happened, they then say the 13th floor fell on the 12th, and then we have a pancaking collapse. Well, look, there's three other girders attached to column 79, which are still in place and solid, and so that floor couldn't have fallen, even if this girder did fall. So this string of events is absolutely ludicrous from beginning to end, because even if this floor did fall, by the way, it around column 79, you wouldn't have had a massive catastrophic pancaking collapse beginning here, because you have the same structure under floor 12 as you have up here under 13. 4 massive girders. So you can't, those connections never would have broken. Anyway, I've belabored the point. You begin to understand what I'm talking about. Here's the drawing that shows that there was indeed 30 shear studs along this column, which is the one we've been talking, this girder, which is the one we've been talking about, these beams being the ones that expanded, this column being 79, which is said to have failed after 9 floors left it unbraced after they fell. Okay, so the stiffeners are shown in the shop drawings that I mentioned. They're right here in these 2 different views. So we have an effort, a legal effort, to hold NIST accountable for these omissions. And that's ongoing. Now, NIST actually tries to prove their theory here, which in this computer model, which, as you see right away, actually disproves the model. We have the video on the left timed with their model on the right, which shows 400 structural steel connections failing every second in their computer model in order to get it to try to mimic what's going on in reality with the video. That's the level of failure in these connections that can't even happen in any kind of a natural collapse. That's like firing a fire hose on a sandcastle. That's the level of failure we're talking about here. Also, you see massive warping, even in their computer model, which actually looks even more natural. You begin to see incredible warping, and the building actually begins to tip over. So this is what you'd see in any kind of a natural collapse. So they can't even get their computer model to mimic the behavior as we see in the videos, other than the initial east penthouse collapse, which occurs 6 seconds prior to the building. So also note that their computer model stops 2 seconds. They will not show us what happens in their computer model after the first 2 seconds. Why? Well, it begins to tip over. It would completely disprove their own theory were they to go any further here with this ludicrous computer model. So indeed, it does fall into its own footprint. It does not fall over. So we have some serious problems. It's centered in the pile of the building. The pile is centered in the building's footprint. 4 to 6 story pile, like a house of cards. This was a moment resisting steel frame building, which the columns, many of the columns and beams are rigidly welded to each other. 47 stories dropped to a pile just 6 stories tall. And remember, not only is there no basement under this building, there's a Con Edison electrical substation under this pile. So literally, there is no space here where the framing would have held any of the building intact. When we do have building failures such as earthquakes and natural causes of mid-rise buildings, we have some earthquakes that have brought those buildings over. You have very clearly a pile that's seen at the bottom. A building that's seen at the bottom that's recognizable as a building, broken up certainly. But how do we bring a building down symmetrically? Well, we have to remove all 80 columns in that building and all at once, or a building will begin to tip over. So that has to be done on at least 8 floors, which is the distance this building actually fell at free fall, and pretty much has to be done on every floor. How does fire have that level of precision? That's a key question here. That's one of the very key questions, because how fast does this building fall? Is it falling at free fall acceleration? Well, let's listen to David Chandler, a physics teacher, who explains to us at a very basic level what happened to make this building. How is it falling so fast?
We can measure the downward acceleration of Building 7 by video frame analysis. I used a magnifying glass to place markers on the corner of the building on each frame. From this, we can get a data table and various graphs. The slope of this graph indicates acceleration, which is shown here to be about minus 10.279 plus or minus 0.6. Free fall in a vacuum is minus 9.8 in these units. That falls within the margin of error of this measurement. In other words, the rate of fall of Building 7 in the first few seconds is indistinguishable from free fall in a vacuum.
Well, what does that mean, free fall? Well, that means that there's no resistance in the building. And NIST first said it can't be free fall because that would mean there'd be no structure. Structure is resistance. Well, they were forced by David Chandler in a public meeting to acknowledge it did come down at free fall, but they do not acknowledge the implications of that. They acknowledge it only in their final report, but the implications, which are incredible, are not acknowledged. The implication, of course, is that all those columns were removed at once on each floor. Think about that. Do we have the total dismemberment of this steel structure? Yes. As we talked about, it falls like a house of cards. One column dismembered from the next beam in almost every case. As we see in this structure, when buildings fall naturally, we see a building mangled, certainly, but its structure is not dismembered. Is there minimal damage to adjacent structures? Well, certainly minimal damage there, and that's the idea of controlled demolitions. You can control them. Is there chemical evidence of thermite or incendiaries or explosives in the residue? Well, let's take a look at not what others who question the official story are saying, but the officials themselves. Like the author of the FEMA report, who says, Jonathan Barnett, partially evaporated beams, steel members in the debris pile, partially evaporated in extraordinarily high temperatures. This is a fire protection engineer. And it takes 4,000 degree temperatures to evaporate steel. What could cause that? You see it here, documented by another structural engineer, Abolhaz Astani, because this material was hauled away and held at the Fresh Kills landfill. And they document it. In fact, FEMA documented it in their initial investigation or building report. They cite in their Appendix C some fascinating phenomena, which the New York Times calls this the deepest mystery uncovered in the investigation. The presence of sulfur, eutectic reactions involving sulfur, melting capable of turning a solid steel girder into Swiss cheese, like this piece of World Trade Center 7 steel. Fires don't do this. Office fires are maybe 400 degrees, 500 degrees, maybe 1,000. NIST claims in the World Trade Center 1,800 degrees. But that doesn't melt steel. Steel doesn't melt until much greater temperatures, 2,800 degrees minimum. Rapid oxidation is documented. Sulfidation, that's sulfur. Where does the sulfur come from? They can't figure this out. Sulfur is added to thermite, which is an incendiary used by the military to cut through steel like a hot knife through butter. It becomes thermate then, much more effective at cutting through steel. Liquid iron. Now, they're documenting liquid iron. Liquid iron is the byproduct of thermite. Thermite is basically iron oxide, which is rust, and aluminum powders. It produces massive amounts of molten iron, which is used for cutting through steel. There are patented devices to do that. We'll be taking a look at those. This is all direct evidence of explosive destruction so far, including some of the information last week that we've looked at here. And fire, in our opinion, can't create any one of these features, let alone all of them. Wow, especially these fires. World Trade Center 5, right next door to Building 7, which was responsible for most of the smoke that we see that's incorrectly associated with the minimal fires in Building 7. It's fully engulfed. If any of the buildings at World Trade Center were to collapse, we'd expect it to be this one. Did it? No. Mid-rise, high-rise office buildings do not collapse, have never collapsed due to fire, except on 9/11 when we have 3. Not even in 2009 in China with this building, which is completely engulfed from ground to roof. Did it collapse? No. On the left, before the fire. On the right, after the fire, slightly toasted around the edges. It's being remodeled. Going to be put back into use. But these small fires, few and scattered, brought this building down in 6.5 seconds into a pile, 4, 5, 6 stories tall. We're not buying it. And actually, the government assists us in questioning their own theory, because the official investigations into Building 7 started with the Society of Civil Engineers in 2001, which were volunteers, but volunteers which had some real interesting ties to federal contracts, previous federal contracts, and projects. 2002, we have the FEMA report. We looked at the Appendix C from that. They had only $600,000 of funding. And then NIST took over that report after FEMA and ejected the Appendix C, not discussing in any useful manner whatsoever the massive, overwhelming evidence of hot molten iron and sulfur and eutectic attacks on the steel. Or, as we saw last week, the evidence of explosions. Lots and lots of witnesses in Building 7. Well, let's look at these individuals. We have the FEMA report with lots of these individuals, and guess what? They carry on through not only the NIST report, but into the popular mechanics effort to debunk those who question the official story or purport to. So everybody who worked on NIST was involved originally in the FEMA reports, i.e. these are not independent investigations whatsoever. The effort to consolidate the evidence and the analysis of it was apparently made from the very beginning. What does FEMA say, though, in their initial report? The collapse of World Trade Center 7 had a small debris field as the facade was pulled downward, suggesting an internal failure and implosion. Okay, that's very, very helpful information. What do these other experts say? We have 80 structural engineers and signed on to our petition calling for a new investigation. This is not one of them, but an independent assessment. What does he say, Hugo Bachmann? In my opinion, World Trade Center 7 was with great probability professionally demolished. This is the chairman of the Department of Structural Dynamics, Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. This petition signer of AE says a localized failure in a steel frame building like World Trade Center 7 cannot cause a catastrophic collapse like a house of cards without a simultaneous and patterned loss of several of its columns at key locations within the building. So he's not going to speculate that this is explosives, but only explosives can do this. This is important for everybody to get. Well, do we have foreknowledge of this building's destruction? Well, this fire chief, Nick Visconti, announces, hey, we're moving the command post over this way. That building's coming down. Well, they're telling everybody the building's coming down. It has structural damage, but no building has high-rises come down due to fire or the few small beams that caused some structural damage that NIST later concluded was not even a significant factor in its collapse. So there's foreknowledge here. In fact, Indira Singh says she's an EMT worker, because Building 7, they were told Building 7 was going to come down or was being brought down, implying, of course, volition here for the first time. Did they actually use those words, being brought down? Who was telling you this? Yes, the fire department. They said, we're going to have to bring it down. Well, fire departments don't bring buildings down. They try to put them out. They save the people, and they try to save the building if possible. What is going on here? Well, listen to these mysterious construction workers walking away from Building 7. After hearing an explosion, they look over their shoulder, and then they look straight into the CNN camera, and you can hear them.
Keep your eye on that building. It's coming down. The building is about to blow up. Moving back. All right, guys.
We are walking back. It's a building about to blow up. All flame, debris coming down.
The building is about to blow up, flame and debris coming down. So now they're not just saying, hey, the building has structural damage and it might collapse, so we're pulling everybody 6 blocks away just in case that happens. They're saying again that it's coming down. Well, with the information you've heard last week and this week, the question for you is the hypothesis corroborated of explosive demolition? Do we have, as shown so far, the 8 key characteristics of explosive or incendiary destruction? Can fire create any one of these, let alone all 8 of them? And next week we'll look at damning evidence, by the way, of molten steel and iron and thermite incendiaries. So we'll be adding to the mix. Do we have additional corroborative evidence, data from the FEMA reports, first responders' testimony, expert corroboration, foreknowledge? Is this to you proof beyond a reasonable doubt of controlled demolition? Feel free to put your vote in the comment box there, the question box, because we're gonna be looking at those as well as your questions, which you have as a result of seeing the evidence today. We're hoping you'll join us in demanding a new investigation, that you'll call and write your elected representatives, because when they get dripped on by the thousands, it really does work and have an effect. We want you to call and write your local national television stations, radio stations, newspapers. Tell everyone you know. Send the AE911Truth.org link to every architect and engineer that you can find, and everybody else that you know. There's action that you can take with us too. Signing the petition is a huge help. You don't have to be an architect or engineer. We have 20,000 others besides our 2,500 architects and engineers. Become a member of AE911Truth. Join us. Take a stand with us. Some people can't donate. Some people just don't have time to work on projects, or they want to be anonymous. This is your opportunity to join architects and engineers, and for $2.50 a month, as little as that, or $10 or $25 a month, you can really make a huge difference. We have a number of people who keep our doors open, keep us talking and outreaching to architects and engineers and others, or a large donation. And you can certainly volunteer with us. In fact, Andy's here, and Andy is our volunteer coordinator. Andy, I think there are some important opportunities at this point, right?
Oh, absolutely. If you're watching this webinar and you're moved by this evidence, you want to do what you can to get this information to others, important people. We have a lot of projects going on right now, continuous outreach efforts, lots of work happening to get the information that you're watching before the eyes and ears of various professionals. And also we are open to new ideas too. So if you've got ideas on how to get the information to others, we'll want to hear it. So all you got to do is go up to the What You Can Do tab at the top of the screen here at AE911Truth.org, and you'll see there's a option to volunteer. You click that, you fill out the volunteer box, and we will get in touch with you and get you started.
Hey, that's fantastic. Thanks, Andy. We have dozens and dozens of people who do various things. We need a lot more help, as you've heard. Do share the DVDs. You can speak to new audiences. You can screen the DVD right in your own living room. And I'm talking about the DVD that I'm going to show you a sample of in just a moment. But all of these resources can be shared. One of the resources that we're developing for you is this 2-year study from the University of Alaska's Leroy Halsey. One of the top structural forensic engineers in the country, and we've engaged him and his team of PhD students to commence an independent computer dynamic analysis of Building 7 to show what could and could not bring that building down. And they're about 8 months into this 2-year study, and we need your support. It's a $215,000 effort. And if you believe in our work and us, then please support this project. You can be a sustaining supporter for $5, $10, $15, $25 a month or more. We've got to have every architect and engineer certainly on board supporting this extremely valuable project. In about a year, we're going to have some incredible results. We've already had our first quarterly meeting, and we're astounded by what he's found. I can assure you he's objective, and I can assure you he has his doubts about what we're told. And those doubts are nowhere better formulated than by us in our latest 55 or 52-page booklet, Beyond Misinformation. And guess what? You can get this for free. Just click on the link down below on our website on the webinar page. Many of you are already on it. Those of you who aren't, just go to ae911truth.org/webinars, and you can get this emailed to you for free in the PDF format. And what you're going to see in there is evidence that 40 high-rise architects, structural engineers, metallurgists, chemists, physicists, controlled demolition experts have all compiled in our landmark DVD, 9/11 Explosive Evidence Experts Speak Out. This is the trailer for that. It's just a couple of minutes, and I'm excited to share it with you. Take a watch.
I don't want to be involved in conspiracy theories. They can go on. We can speculate on that forever. What we really need to know is how those buildings came down.
World Trade Center 7 collapsed because of fires fueled by office furnishings. It did not collapse from explosives or from fuel oil fires.
To undermine scientific integrity is to undermine our democracy.
This is what NIST has done, denied and ignored crucial evidence.
The American people absolutely need the truth of 9/11.
More than 1,500 architects and engineers and 12,000 others, including many scientists, have signed the petition calling for a scientific investigation of the destruction of the Twin Towers and World Trade Center Building 7. The report, issued by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, referred to as NIST, was not valid science.
They're talking about a single columnar collapse or failure that resulted in a total collapse of the building.
Building number 7 descended in free fall for the first 100 feet, which means that there was absolutely no resistance to the descent whatsoever.
So all of the columns really needed to be severed at the same time.
The symmetry is the smoking gun.
NIST has admitted it went into free fall for 8 stories.
You don't need to be an engineer or an architect to see what happened to those buildings.
Dit is controlled demolition.
Zeker weten.
Zeker weten.
What I saw, it was a classic implosion. The center of the core, the penthouse area, starts to move first, and then the building follows along with it.
NIST excluded the document from FEMA in Appendix C that documented the evidence of melting steel.
In an office fire, you cannot generate enough heat to melt steel.
There were these iron microspheres present in all of the dust samples. They needed to have been formed in extremely high temperatures.
All the characteristics of the microspheres, along with what I see in the attack of the beams that were actually found, tell me that thermite was involved.
In the dust, what we had found is a modern version of thermite, which we call nanothermite.
NIST concedes that they found no evidence for explosives. So then we asked them, well, did you look? And they said, no, we did not look for explosives or residues of explosives.
And in fact, the evidence is overwhelming that these red-grade crystals are very high-temperature incendiaries.
And we have watched as scientific integrity has been undermined and scientific research politicized in an effort to advance predetermined ideological agendas.
If this is a crime, I think everybody agrees it's a crime. Evidence was removed from the scene of the crime. You can't do science when you are deprived of the evidence and when your hypothesis is the least valid instead of the most likely. And the most likely hypothesis in the case of Building 7 wasn't even mentioned. This is not science.
Yes, it's a good film, and it's turned a lot of heads around, opened a lot of minds. And so please invite your friends, family, colleagues to your living room or office and screen this film. It's available. There's a 1-hour version on YouTube you can get for free, the 90-minute versions in our store, and please avail yourself of the opportunity. We are coming your direction. We have a Northwest tour currently, and we're halfway through it. We've been to Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. We're going to Montana next week, 6 cities. And after that, we'll be heading to the Southeast, which is the last couple of weeks of the last week of May and the first week of June. So if you're in Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, stay tuned. You'll get an email from us. If you're not getting emails from us, sign the petition, certainly, or the email newsletter sign up. If you want us to come to your city in the Southeast or the Midwest, submit a note to Andy right there on the front page, or send us an email on a contact us form on our website. I will be joined by Eric Lawyer, who is featured in the film along with me, this dual presentation, a historic presentation from the firefighters' side. We're talking about the National Fire Protection Association manual, which governs an investigation of explosions and fires. And that actually NIST had a hand in developing, quite a hand in developing this manual, and yet they didn't follow these. And so what Eric does is rip NIST apart. That is to say, shows how they were fraudulent in so many different respects, from the beginning of the destruction of evidence and omission of evidence to their faulty conclusions and everything in between. So we want you to avail yourself of this DVD, which the 1-hour version is available on YouTube. Firefighters, architects, and engineers expose 9/11 myths. Today we looked at week 2 and the in-depth, and we'll be doing that again actually we won't. On Sunday, we have I'll be on that tour I mentioned, and I'll be driving, and we're going to figure out what it is that we're going to be providing you. Andy, do you have some insight in that yet?
With regard to next week's, no, everybody just can stand by. We'll get an announcement out regarding what we will do for Sunday. If we have to rerun it, an old one, we can on the subject that we would be covering normally, but we will talk.
Yeah, and we may have a special guest as well. So stay tuned and come back on Sunday at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. We'll bring the information to you one way or another, as I'll be on the road through Missoula and Hamilton, Montana. Very exciting tour. We're expecting about 200 people in some of these towns in Montana. Extraordinary results. In Portland, we had 181 people, had 85 people in Seattle. And in every case, as I've done now 500 presentations, 550 around the world in 38 countries and 90 American cities, we have, by a show of hands, convinced virtually everybody in the audience who wasn't convinced already of the veracity of the evidence and the need for a real investigation. The evidence for controlled demolition is what the investigations should be revealing. But so far, other than ours and other researchers in the 9/11 Truth Movement, have not shown. So at this point, we want to take some questions, and I'm sure we have some already, don't we, Andy?
We certainly do. The first question that I have for us is from one of our viewers is, what is the likelihood that the outer shell of World Trade Center 7 would remain standing while the internal supports and floors collapsed, as in this explanation?
Yeah, it's extremely not just unlikely, but impossible. What NIST says is the inside of this building basically caved in on itself, leaving the exterior perimeter structure intact, leaving the granite panels undamaged, leaving most all of the windows unbroken. Can you imagine? I mean, these are welded and bolted connections. If you're going to have the inside collapsing, those columns, which are welded, bolted to the exterior perimeter structure, are going to pull them in and do what NIST actually did show in their computer model, which was massive deformation on the perimeter structure. So it's a complete impossibility. Their theory, they can't even get their computer model to show what actually anywhere near what happened in the video.
Okay, our next question asks, have incendiaries ever been used in a controlled demolition in the past?
There are examples of at least one that we're aware of. In fact, this is the World Fair. There was a tower that was taken down by thermite in the 1940s or 50s. So we know that happened. We also know, as we'll be showing in week 3 or 4, when we get to the Twin Towers, you'll see some examples of thermite cutter charges made by an engineer in his own backyard. And he cuts through steel quite cleanly. And in fact, there are patented devices which use thermite in shaped cutter charges that issue molten iron in milliseconds, much more effective at cutting through steel even than high energy explosives like C4 and RDX. Well, why wouldn't they just use those? They're a lot less expensive. Well, C4 and RDX provide they're less expensive, but they provide loud bangs and bright flashes, and that would be way too obvious in a deceptive controlled demolition, which is what we're looking at the evidence for so far in Building 7 this week and coming weeks, the Twin Towers.
Okay, our next question is more of a statement, and I think it's trying to answer why NIST might be keeping the input data on Building 7 secret. So it's going to ask you to comment on it, but it just says releasing the NIST report could jeopardize public safety. It might show exactly how one could place demolition material in a high-rise building, causing it to collapse. So I guess it's just challenging you to expand on why that data should be released or why NIST should be keeping it secret.
Well, it's inconceivable. I mean, that is to say, I can't think of a good reason to hide the information that could save thousands of Americans from a free-falling skyscraper due to normal office fires, which could happen in hundreds of other buildings that are similarly constructed as Building 7. In fact, NIST did actually have some recommendations for structural changes in buildings, but none of those changes or suggestions were ever made in the International Building Code, which governs how these buildings are built. And I don't believe that releasing their computer input data would be of any value to terrorists who want to place charges in buildings. I mean, that information is a different set of information. It's also highly controlled by the controlled demolition industry, of which there are only a half a dozen experts, companies in the world who are capable of doing a job like this. And by the way, we certainly want an investigation of each and every one of those companies as a possible suspect. I mean, when you have a professional assassination and you're doing a criminal investigation, you want to find out who had the capability to pull off a job like that. And so we don't think we're talking about Al-Qaeda here, but that's a speculation. We don't do too much speculation at AE911Truth. We focus on the scientific evidence, but we're not stupid either.
Okay, and our next question is sort of a personal one, but it is relevant because I think this is something that might go through building professionals' minds as they consider this and signing the petition. Has being involved in this cost you any jobs? Are you getting any pushback? It says from the government, but I would elaborate too and say any other organizations that you do business with.
I have not. Personally, I worked for 4 years following my entry into the 9/11 issue. After forming this organization, I didn't work for companies who had federal contracts, so maybe I was less vulnerable to such. But we haven't heard of any of our 2,500 petition signers who have gotten who have been fired or received threats as a result of their work. There's a number of petition signers who felt nervous about signing our petition because it is on the internet, it is public information, it is taking a stand against fraudulence in government reports. But it hasn't been that much of an issue. I haven't been threatened, with my health or life that I know of, anyway. And we haven't even received a phone call. So that's joyful news. On the other hand, we would like to be somehow recognized as doing a very important job in waking up not just architects and engineers, but every American citizen to the reality that we have been deceived, not just with these building reports, which we have proven in this webinar series and our other DVDs, but we've been deceived in the whole reasons for going to and staying in countries. We've lost 7,000 soldiers. We've killed 2 million Iraqis and Afghanis. 2 major wars. Other countries now have been invaded. There's a very strong reason for us standing up, and it's not just about buildings. It's about civil liberties, which have been eroded by executive orders and legislation, such as the Patriot Act, the Military Commissions Act, the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012, where any of us, me or you, can be arrested without a right to a lawyer, a trial, a jury. We can be detained indefinitely. We can be tortured, assassinated. This is all, I'm quoting now, legal. This is not what our forefathers fought for. So we have much larger issues that have stemmed from 9/11 and the aftermath of 9/11. This national surveillance, policy of torture, all these things we're concerned about. We don't focus on those at AE911Truth, but we raise the awareness to people because it is essential that we realize that we're not just talking about buildings or even the murder of 3,000 people in the Twin Towers, and including the firefighters. We have very, very serious issues that extend even well beyond that initial tragedy on 9/11.
Okay, our next question is more of a comment, so I'm just going to ask you to comment on it. Somebody submitted this. At the moment free fall began, the columns which were holding the east penthouse were gone 6.9 seconds before. Also, the columns which were supporting the screen wall AC and the west penthouse were gone at the moment when free fall began. So about 58 from 82 columns had to be removed symmetrically and simultaneously over about 8 floors at the moment when free fall began. Do you have any comments or elaboration?
Well, I agree with what I heard, and it's just very clear that when that penthouse and that screen wall go down a half a second prior to the overall collapse, it's directly indicative. It's just obvious to a child that the support underneath those must have gone out all at once. The gentleman mentions or lady 52 columns. Yeah, there's perimeter columns, and then there's the core columns. There's 24 core columns underneath the penthouse, the west penthouse and screen wall apparatus. Well, there's some of those are under the east penthouse, which, as he mentioned, fall 7 seconds or so prior to the overall collapse of the building. So those columns must have been removed. Maybe they're ill-timed. We don't know the reason for the collapse of the east penthouse. We do know that it's not a complete catastrophic structure as a result of column 79 failing about 30 floors below, because we would have seen daylight through the windows visible in the videos all the way down to the 13th floor. We don't see that. So that east penthouse appears to have been a series of explosions that went off way too early. And so that's how they then focused their effort on column 79 to justify the failure of that east penthouse, because column 79 is under that. We also have the worst fires, by the way, around on the 12th and 13th floor, which I didn't mention, but if you look at who's inhabiting this building, we're talking about the CIA, the IRS, the Department of Defense, Mayor Giuliani's Office of Emergency Management, and on the 12th and 13th floor, which had the worst fires, we're talking about the Securities and Exchange Commission, which lost thousands of very important files and other evidence related to hundreds of high-profile cases against significant companies like Enron, WorldCom, and others. So this is a very curious fire, the worst fires in the building. We certainly want an investigation of those fires, and with an emphasis on possible arson. But that was a side note that I find very, very interesting.
Okay, our next question I'm actually going to take because it's something I am closest to here. Are there any candidates running for office, president, Senate, House, that have responded to this evidence? We currently do have a candidate survey going out right now from our government outreach team, volunteers to various candidates around the country. Some of them have responded very positively to this. I haven't gotten their permission to associate them with this position yet. When we do, we can let them be known. But essentially, these candidate surveys do show them video of Building 7 going down, and there are a lot more people in the political realm who are aware of this and are trying to deal with it in the best way that they can. We've also had congressmen on live television give very supportive answers to the when asked about this evidence, including Congressman McDermott. I'm not sure off the top of my head if he's still in office, but he was a congressman from Washington State who said that these questions about Building 7 are very valid, and that they should answer them the sooner the better, in his opinion. So the word is getting out there, and more people in the political spheres are aware of this than a lot of us do think. Do you have any comments, Richard?
We did indeed give our DVD and our petition to every one of the 435 congressmen, congresspersons, when we had 1,000 architects and engineers, again when we had 2,000, and we'll do the same thing again when we have 3,000. We'll mail it to every one of them. We visited offices. We've been to dozens and dozens and dozens of offices with personal visits from constituents. We've gone with them. We have a presentation that we've done to the staffers, usually with all we can see. There's a congressman in Connecticut we actually met with, and he wrote NIST and said, hey, there seems to be evidence for thermite here. And they wrote back and say, no, we looked at that. There's aluminum in the airplanes, and there's iron in the steel, and so it's all common. Go back to sleep. There's nothing here for you to look at. I'm paraphrasing. This is so ludicrous. What we're going to show you in week 3 and 4 is of this webinar series is very, very sophisticated nanothermite technology that's responsible for the residue of iron that you find throughout the World Trade Center dust. That not just us, but the USGS and RJ Lee doing toxicological studies, but independent scientists have also confirmed and independently collected samples, very sophisticated super thermite it's called, and I'm looking forward to sharing that evidence with you too. And so, we just keep at it. We're doing everything that we can do, that we have time to do, that we have support, the support of like the audience today. I mean, every one of you, hopefully, if you're convinced by this evidence, you're showing that conviction by supporting AE911 Truth as a member. Very, very important.
And Richard, I just wanted to also mention, I forgot to before, we just released an action alert calling for the Transparency Act, which is currently in committee in the Senate, to be expanded to include information about Building 7. This is the Transparency for 9/11 Victims and Survivors Act of 2015, which is focusing on another aspect of 9/11. But our points that we're asking it to be expanded to include things about releasing the input data on Building 7, including the missing building features, other points. And you can actually read that if you've gotten that email already. If you haven't gotten that email, you can write me, A Steele, ASTEELE, at AE911Truth.org. I will send you the link, and all you have to do is put in your address and zip code. All of that is included in it, and it will generate an automatic letter on behalf of AE911Truth from you to your senators. And the hope is that they will see these piling up in their inbox and respond to them accordingly. Our next question, and this is going to be our last one for the day, asks us if there's any updates on the University of Alaska project and what are the latest developments.
One of the most important projects we have ever done at AE911Truth, and perhaps in the 9/11 Truth movement, which is composed of millions of people around the world. This project will shake up the professional community and the academic communities, because it will be a peer-reviewed study, the first independent open architecture. We're not hiding anything like NIST did. The University of Alaska is taking input from people who are supportive of our position and people who are against it. They're being very, very objective about it. Again, one of the top structural forensic engineers in the country. They're 8 months into the 2-year project, and we have information even early on that leads us to believe that this is indeed independent and not only not co-opted, but unco-optable, if you will. We've spent a lot of time with Leroy Halsey on the phone and his PhD team, and we had our first quarterly report from them, the draft. We'll be issuing that publicly real soon, and it has some indication that what we're told happened to this building could not have happened, and the objectivity required for this report means that the conclusions have to be withheld until the end. But I can just assure you that we're heading in the right direction, and very pleased with the professional level. We have high-rise structural engineers and architects working with Leroy Halsey, who have signed our petition, and others who are PhD structural engineers who are just all over every detail of this. So it's not slipping away from us by any means. And a peer-reviewed study of the collapse of a 47-story skyscraper that's completely unprecedented is going to take by storm in the academic community. So that's what I can share with you so far, and I encourage everybody to learn more at WTC7evaluation.org.
Okay, I want to thank everybody for tuning in to today's webinar series. These go on usually every Sunday at 4 o'clock Pacific time, 7 o'clock Eastern time, and of course Thursdays at 1 o'clock Pacific time, 4 o'clock Eastern time. If you're moved by the evidence that you've witnessed today, then I invite you to invite your friends, share this link to these webinars, tell them when they are happening, and get these in front of as many professional people, political people, whoever you think needs to see it and can do something to get a new investigation going. So thank you for tuning in.
You bet. And thanks, Andy, for being here. And again, next week, we'll either be sharing this week's webinar or we'll have a special guest. So stand by. And coming up, we have week 3 next Thursday, and Sunday following that, a look into the Twin Towers. So fascinating information there. So encourage everybody to come back, and we'll see you then.